What's fascinating about individuals with exceptionally high IQs is that they often appear very different from what most people imagine. Many assume that someone with a remarkably high IQ will seem obviously brilliant, consistently self-assured, openly working through complex problems, and making their intelligence impossible to overlook. Yet psychological research repeatedly paints a completely different picture. Many of the behaviors most frequently observed in people with exceptionally high IQs do not resemble intelligence at all. In fact, some can even appear to suggest the opposite. After decades of examining highly intelligent individuals, cognitive psychologists have discovered that a very high IQ does more than increase a person's intellectual abilities. It fundamentally alters the way they interpret and engage with the world. And that distinction tends to reveal itself through specific and easily identifiable patterns of behavior. Here are 11 psychological characteristics that studies consistently associate with people who possess exceptionally high IQs. Sign number one, they spend considerable time by themselves. The first characteristic is a pronounced preference for solitude. People with high intelligence frequently choose to spend long periods alone. This is not because they dislike being around others, but because their minds are constantly active and processing information. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for advanced reasoning, strategic planning, and deep contemplation, generally performs at its best in calm settings, free from outside distractions. For a highly intelligent mind, being alone is not the same as being lonely. It serves as a source of energy. Research conducted by the London School of Economics uncovered a finding that initially appears surprising. Highly intelligent individuals reported noticeably lower levels of life satisfaction from frequent social interaction than people with average IQ scores. In other words, their minds do not always recover and recharge in the same way as most people's. They gain renewal through quietness and mental space. This does not mean that highly intelligent individuals are antisocial or unpleasant to be around. It simply means that their cognitive processes operate at a depth that requires periods of solitude to perform at their highest level. Social interaction can be stimulating and rewarding, but it is also mentally demanding for a mind that is constantly examining every detail and hidden layer of what is taking place in a room. Sign number two, their minds rarely ever shut down completely. The second characteristic is a mind that never truly becomes quiet. Individuals with very high IQs often describe their thoughts as constantly active, not while resting, not late at night, and not even during activities that most people consider calming or relaxing. There is always something running in the background, analyzing a problem, replaying a conversation, developing a new idea, or mentally rehearsing scenarios that have not yet taken place. Psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski examined this phenomenon extensively among gifted individuals and explained it through his theory of overexcitabilities. He observed that highly intelligent people frequently display what he referred to as psychomotor overexcitability, an ongoing inner restlessness that manifests itself mentally rather than through physical activity, a powerful urge to think that seems to have no natural off switch. Research conducted by neuroscientist Rex Young at the University of New Mexico found that higher intelligence is linked to stronger connectivity between distant areas of the brain, rather than simply faster processing within isolated regions. The highly intelligent brain does not merely process information more rapidly, it continuously forms connections across a far broader network of concepts and ideas, often all at the same time. That persistent interconnectedness is one reason genuine rest can be difficult. The brain is not malfunctioning, it is simply operating exactly as it was designed to. Sign number three, they experience emotions more deeply than they reveal. The third characteristic is often the one that surprises people most when they encounter the research. There is a common belief that exceptional intelligence is accompanied by emotional distance, the image of a cold, highly rational thinker who exists almost entirely in the world of ideas. Yet psychological research consistently challenges this assumption. Individuals with significantly above average IQs tend to experience emotions with greater intensity than most people, not less. Dabrowski described this phenomenon as emotional overexcitability, a heightened sensitivity to emotional experiences that makes highly intelligent individuals especially responsive to beauty, music, injustice, and the pain experienced by others. A study published in the journal Intelligence found that higher measured IQ was associated with significantly stronger emotional responsiveness and greater emotional depth, particularly when people encountered art, ethical dilemmas, and complex human behavior. The reason this characteristic often goes unnoticed is that highly intelligent individuals also tend to be highly skilled at regulating and managing their emotional reactions internally. They may feel things intensely, but they do not always display those feelings outwardly. As a result, their emotional depth can remain hidden from others for much longer than expected. Sign number 4, they are comfortable saying, "I don't know." The fourth characteristic is intellectual humility. This trait often surprises people because we tend to assume that greater intelligence naturally leads to greater confidence. Yet psychological research repeatedly reveals the opposite pattern. Individuals with exceptionally high IQs are much more likely to acknowledge the boundaries of their knowledge than those with average IQs, and they do so sincerely rather than as a social strategy or performance. This tendency is closely connected to the Dunning-Kruger effect, the well-established finding that limited knowledge can sometimes create excessive confidence because a person lacks the understanding needed to recognize the true complexity of a subject. Highly intelligent individuals, on the other hand, are deeply familiar with that complexity. They have reflected extensively, encountered countless exceptions, and explored enough perspectives to recognize how much uncertainty genuinely remains. As a result, when a highly intelligent person says, "I don't know," it is not a sign of hesitation. It is a sign of accuracy, and it remains one of the strongest indicators of genuine intelligence identified by psychological research. The person who expresses every opinion with complete certainty, regardless of the available evidence, is rarely the most intelligent individual in the room. Sign number 5, they struggle to find people who think on the same level. The fifth characteristic is one that highly intelligent individuals seldom discuss openly, yet research suggests it is remarkably common among them. They often find it genuinely difficult to discover people with whom they can fully connect on an intellectual level. Not because they consider themselves superior, but because conversations that never move beyond the surface, or people who are uninterested in deeper questions, can leave them feeling a very particular kind of mental understimulation. Psychologist Lita Hollingworth, who devoted decades to studying highly gifted adults, identified what she called the problem of stimulus poverty. This refers to the experience of a mind that cannot find enough challenge, complexity, or intellectual depth within its immediate surroundings. What she observed was not arrogance or a sense of superiority. It was a quiet desire for meaningful conversation and genuine intellectual engagement. They long for someone capable of following them all the way to the deepest layers of an idea without feeling the need to stop or turn back. As a result, highly intelligent individuals can sometimes come across as distant or detached, not because they lack social skills, but because experience has taught them that most conversations are not designed to sustain the level of depth they naturally seek. So they restrain themselves. They simplify their thoughts, tone themselves down, and much of who they truly are never enters the conversation at all. Sign number 6, they change their minds when the evidence changes. The sixth characteristic is cognitive flexibility. Highly intelligent individuals tend to view their beliefs as provisional models rather than permanent identities. When new information emerges, especially information that directly challenges what they previously accepted as true, they revise their understanding accordingly. They do not experience changing their minds as a threat to their sense of self. They experience it as a movement toward greater accuracy. In psychology, this ability is known as cognitive flexibility, and it remains one of the most reliable indicators of advanced reasoning and problem-solving capacity. The mind of a highly intelligent person is not emotionally attached to being right about any particular belief. Instead, it is focused on developing the most accurate understanding of reality possible, even if that requires abandoning ideas that were once held with confidence. From an outside perspective, this can sometimes appear inconsistent. Someone who revises their position may seem unreliable, but what is actually taking place is the opposite of confusion. It is a mind engaged in a continuous and honest process of updating its conclusions. The people who refuse to change their views regardless of new evidence are rarely the most intelligent individuals in the room. Sign number 7. They notice far more than they reveal. The seventh characteristic is a preference for observation before expression. In conversations and social environments, highly intelligent people often choose to observe before they speak. They pay attention not only to what is being said, but also to what remains unspoken. They recognize patterns in social interactions, who influences whom, where the underlying tensions exist, and what the discussion is really about beneath the surface, before offering their own contribution. Research on social intelligence and overall cognitive ability consistently shows that higher IQ is associated with greater accuracy in interpreting social signals and emotional cues. However, it also means that highly intelligent individuals often require additional time to process everything they are noticing before responding. They are not slower thinkers. They are simply collecting more information first. This creates a common and often frustrating misunderstanding. The quiet person who is carefully observing is frequently assumed to have the least to offer. In reality, that individual is often the one with the clearest and most complete understanding of what is actually taking place. Sign number 8. They procrastinate most on the work that matters to them the most. The eighth characteristic is one that highly intelligent individuals often find particularly difficult to understand about themselves. The projects that carry the greatest personal significance, the work with the highest potential impact, are often the most difficult for them to begin. Smaller tasks with lower stakes are usually completed without much effort. Yet the work that could truly reflect the full extent of their abilities often remains permanently suspended at the threshold of action. Researchers who have studied individuals with high cognitive ability have found that this pattern is not a result of laziness. Instead, it reflects what they describe as complexity awareness. Before starting an important project, a highly intelligent mind can already perceive the full scope of what excellence would demand. Every weakness the final result might contain, every way it could fail to match the standard that already exists so clearly in the person's mind. Research by psychologist Carol Dweck identified this tendency as especially common among gifted individuals. It is not exactly a fear of failure. Rather, it is a fear of the distance between the ideal vision held internally and the imperfect reality that external execution may produce. The procrastination does not come from a lack of concern. It comes from caring too much. And the work that remains unfinished or unstarted is often the work that matters most. Sign number 9. They become bored more quickly than almost anyone around them. The ninth characteristic is a low tolerance for repetition and a persistent desire for novelty. Highly intelligent individuals tend to adapt to familiar experiences very rapidly. In other words, they require a greater amount of new stimulation to maintain the same level of engagement that most people can derive from established routines. This does not apply only to obvious situations such as repetitive tasks or slow-moving meetings. At a neurological level, the stimulus that felt rewarding yesterday may no longer provide the same level of satisfaction today. Neuroscientific research has linked higher cognitive ability with elevated baseline dopamine activity in the prefrontal cortex. This system plays a central role in the brain's response to new information, intellectual discovery, and meaningful cognitive challenges. When that challenge is no longer present, the signal decreases dramatically. The resulting restlessness is not simply an emotional state. It is a physiological response to a lack of sufficient mental stimulation. This is why highly intelligent individuals often pursue several interests at the same time, change professional paths more than once, or experience an unexpected sense of dissatisfaction in situations that appear perfectly comfortable from the outside. Their brains are not being ungrateful. They are actively searching for the kind of stimulation they were designed to seek. Sign number 10, they question themselves more than most people would ever imagine. The 10th characteristic is persistent self-doubt, and surprisingly, this trait is closely linked to intelligence rather than standing in opposition to it. People with exceptionally high IQs often experience a level of internal uncertainty that those around them would find difficult to believe. This is not performative modesty. It is a genuine and recurring tendency to question whether their own reasoning is truly as reliable as others assume it to be, not because they are insecure or fragile, but because they understand complexity too deeply to feel completely certain about almost anything. This idea once again relates to the Dunning-Kruger effect, but from the opposite end of the spectrum. The deeper a person's understanding of a subject becomes, the more clearly they recognize the extent of what remains unknown. The more knowledge they acquire, the more accurately they perceive the limits of that knowledge. Intelligence does not create certainty. It creates a more detailed and realistic map of how much territory still remains unexplored. Psychologist Albert Ellis observed that highly intelligent individuals were often the most likely to judge their own work according to standards far more demanding than those they applied to anyone else. And they often interpret any distance between their actual performance and their perceived potential as evidence of a deeper personal inadequacy. Yet this self-doubt is not a sign of lower intelligence. In many cases, it is one of the clearest indicators of higher intelligence. Sign number 11, they carry a quiet feeling of never quite belonging. And the 11th characteristic is the one that connects all the others together. Highly intelligent individuals frequently describe a subtle but persistent sense of not fully fitting in within their social circles, their careers, and sometimes even within society as a whole. Not a dramatic feeling of isolation, but a quiet and ongoing awareness of being slightly out of step with the environment around them. This is not the result of a personality disorder or a lack of social ability. Rather, it is the natural consequence of experiencing the world at a different level of resolution than most people around them. When your mind processes more information, forms more connections, experiences emotions more intensely, and requires greater depth than your surroundings consistently provide, a mild sense of displacement becomes almost unavoidable. Not because something is broken, but because something functions differently. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, whose decades of work on creativity and exceptional minds remain among the most influential contributions to cognitive psychology, found that people with the highest levels of intellectual ability almost universally describe their inner worlds as exceptionally complex, difficult to communicate, and challenging to share with others. Not because they were suffering in a unique way, but because they were experiencing life with a degree of detail and awareness that many of the people around them simply did not. And living at that level of resolution changes what you notice, what you seek, and what ordinary life is capable of providing. What is particularly fascinating about all 11 of these characteristics is how often they are misunderstood. The person who values solitude is often viewed as antisocial. The person whose mind never stops working may appear anxious. The person who feels deeply can seem unexpectedly sensitive. The person who constantly questions themselves may look uncertain. And the person who never quite fits in may be seen as difficult. Yet sometimes what appears to be a collection of quiet struggles is actually something very different. A mind designed to process more information, build more connections, and travel further intellectually than most of the environments it encounters each day. At its core, a very high IQ is not simply about possessing more knowledge or thinking more quickly. It is about experiencing the full complexity of reality with very little filtering between yourself and the world around you. And that, more than any score, test, or numerical measure, may be what makes exceptional intelligence both one of the greatest strengths and one of the greatest burdens a person can carry. If this description resonated with you, consider reflecting on which characteristic felt the most accurate. And if it helped put words to something you have been carrying quietly for a long time, share it with someone who may benefit from hearing it as well. Thank you for reading, and until next time, take care.